Well, I've figured out, or I've discovered, a few things. My stepfather hated me, blamed me for the failure of his marriage. Of course, it was his own lies. And he didn't like being discovered. And I wasn't, well, in a sense I was. I nearly committed suicide over his hatred of me, and around that time, my uncle died. My mother's marriage or trust in my stepfather broke down because she realized he really was nobody's husband as well as nobody's father. She knew he wasn't going to be my father. But she didn't suspect that he would not be her husband. In fact, she said, well, at least I still have a husband, despite the fact that she realized early on that he was not going to be my father. He wasn't interested in putting out. He just wanted a cozy life for himself. Get something and not pay. He thought his money paid for it, but whatever. Or his sex with my mother. Didn't pay for me. Didn't help me any. So he hated me when the marriage broke down and blamed me for sticking around and not leaving the house and staying lost. Get lost, I bet he hates me to this day, still blames me for the breakdown of that marriage. Well, if a person has psychic ability, if they're sensitive, or let's just say anal retentive, psychologically retentive, because I may still have retained that paranoia due to his anger of me. Because he said right to my face that it was my fault that his marriage was a failure. I wasn't too young. I was in my 20s, but still, it kind of stung. So it's no small wonder I almost committed suicide, but because I was going to the beach in despair. And then, in the midst of that, my mother lost her brother. And then she realized, due to my stepfather saying, well, he's your brother, he's not mine, and so he didn't want to support her in her grief, she realized, oh, he really is not my husband. And then she kicked him out of her bedroom, and she said, you've got to leave. And I guess she gave him 6 months, and in 6 months he left. And I predicted in our meeting that we would all split up, all three of us, and go our separate ways. That this was the beginning of the end of any relationship the three of us had with each other. But she had me sent to a shrink to be diagnosed with schizophrenia to shut me up and get welfare. And here I was complaining to her, hey, you're not the only one upset over this. I made sacrifices this whole time. And I started telling her about them. My giving up friends because I didn't want my stepfather to live vicariously through them. It was bad enough he was living vicariously through me and my mother, but she didn't want to hear about it. At first she did, but eventually she stopped. She didn't want to hear about it anymore. She just had her own grief to deal with. And at first she said, well, it's not you, it's me. I just can't handle, is it too much? I have my, own grief to go through. But then she stopped being honest. Didn't take long. And she said, you're going to a I'm sending you to a shrink. Because I couldn't stop. I had been shut up my whole life. Since she shut me up when I was 4 and kept telling me to shut up, and eventually it didn't take long for me to get the message. I shut up. So here I had something to say, because it was cogent to the moment that we were both going through upset over the breakdown of her marriage. Not just her. Because she asked, well, what problem could you possibly have, She was, and she decided that there's no way I could be in my right mind, because I went on and on about it. Because I could see well, not because of that, because I had strong feelings. Anyway, so this is the root of her tagging me. Oh, it's your father's fault. Not my stepfather, but my biological father, my first father. He gave you these genes. She blamed it on my DNA. Oh, come on. Meanwhile, he's hating me for his failure to be honest with her. That he really didn't want to be her husband or my father, and she married him thinking that he was. Oh, I'll make a try at it or something. What is that supposed to mean? I don't know, whatever he's promised her. Wasn't true. So, what I'm realizing is that beeswax is more than a dielectric in the most simple of terms. It's a dielectric of the psyche. And more importantly, it's a dielectric of the subtle psyche, namely psychic ability. Somebody who's sensitive, somebody who's an empath, who feels other people's feelings, somebody who's a telepath, who knows other people's thoughts. The worst part, though, is the feelings, or the intent. Yeah, the feelings, because if you're hated, I've been sleepless at times over the hatred people have of my nudity. But the worst part is the paranoia, in which, you always have this feeling you want to look over your shoulder, because you're afraid which shoe is going to fly next in your face, right? Somebody's going to take off their shoe and throw it at you. Well, basically the biblical stoning somebody, because they hate you so much, and they all want to blame you for how they feel about you, so they stone you to death, It takes care of that. Gets it out of their system. So I literally have no paranoia, and you know what? My appetite has improved tremendously. I can eat easily whatever I want to eat. If I don't want to eat it, I don't eat it, and I don't have any qualms about food and the process of keeping the body alive. I've had this going on now since 1984. It really started in 1984. It just climaxed in 86 or 87. 87. That's right. You'd have been rising. And of course, they put ammonia in the tap water, and that only aggravates the brain, so it only makes problems worse. It shows how maladjusted we were. Well, we went to therapists. We knew we were dysfunctional as a family. But they didn't do anything about it. They went too, eventually, because the therapist realized that I'm not the problem. They're, they suspected. They didn't want to come out and say it. They wanted to see for themselves. So my parents started going to therapy. And then they told me, the therapist said, you stay home. I just want to work on your parents. And then we had a meeting and it said, hey, I've come to the conclusion the parents don't love each other. And I'm being blamed for that. So we knew this. And then we went and forgot it promptly. And now I have to be schizophrenic because, my mother's now blaming me instead of... And then my brother took advantage of that in order to get rid of my son. So it's the most bizarre situation that all starts from a mother's neglect, basically. As well as taking on my stepfather's role of blaming me. Oh, it's not your fault. It's your DNA. It's your genes. I'm saying DNA. She said genes. And my stepfather sold fake designer label jeans. And took offense that I took offense at him earning money in that way. So the word gene is kind of heavily laden. So beeswax doesn't do anything really out of the ordinary. Unless, of course, you don't believe in psychic ability or being empathetic to people. Because I literally have a kind of a hoarse whisperer. I shouldn't underrate it. I do. I have an empathy with animals, creatures. I had an empathy with a scorpion that I was killing. I realized it's insecure. And God gave it a stinger. On top of that, I realized God gave it a stinger to counterpoise its insecurity about itself. So then I realized any fangs, claws, whatever, that any kind of creature has indicates how insecure that creature actually is, because it's given as a compensating mechanism. Little good it does. The scorpion was still insecure, but be that as it may. So I can see the value of beeswax as being a supplement for having been a target for so many years, decades, the target of somebody's hatred. And not just anybody, but somebody I lived with, a stranger in our house for 20 years, who acted like a bystander and didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to get emotional dirt underneath his fingernails, was the way I'd put it. And remain a bystander. Get all the benefits without the cost, basically. No commitment to having a relationship with anyone. He was just a roommate. And yet adopted me to take me off on his income tax. And my brother said, "Oh, do it, it's good, No, it's not, because I knew the guy wasn't father material. A friend material maybe at the most, but actually not even that, just chummy. Chummy. Friends are at least helpful towards each other, but a chum is not. A chum is a goodbye. What do they call it? A good weather friend, who's simply around for the good weather, and when times get bad, you realize them for what they are. They're just a good weather friend, or is what I might call a bar buddy. Carousing at the bar. As in a place of schnapps. Dispensing. A place where schnapps is dispensed, and you meet strangers and they become your friend, only because you're both under the influence. If you were sober all the time, you probably never would have bothered. Let's see. Not that people can't meet interesting people that way, but do you really like the person if you're sober, to judge them while you're sober? Could you tolerate them? Could you live with them? Anyway. So, this has been my problem. Has been this scar, this wound that never healed, and made it possible for, it's been like a climax with losing my son. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it wouldn't close up and heal. And now I know how to heal it from a physiological standpoint. Isn't that cool? That's pretty cool. So there's your 5 cents of free therapy for you. I just shared with you. It's amazing that it's so simple. And the nice part about beeswax, it sticks to you, right? It'll take a while to leave me. And it doesn't take much to work. It's magic either. A little goes a long way. So hiding it in a cheese sauce is a pretty cool way to do it. And you don't even have to eat much of the cheese sauce. I mean, it's literally like a homeopathic... oh my God, I wonder if homeopathy recognizes it for paranoia. This would be interesting. I need to look this up. You can look it up at your end, because I may not post my finding as usually I get lazy and I don't bother. But I could stop the video right now, since I've said just pretty much everything I need to say, and see right now if I can find it. Okay. So, I can't find anybody out there on the internet who already knows the relationship between beeswax and a natural cure for paranoia in the field of homeopathy. So, this is a first. A true discovery in the making here. So that's all I have to say. It works like a charm. A real charmer, yeah. you don't have to draw a circle, and you don't have to take psychotropic medication. You just take very, very, very small amount of beeswax. Hidden in like a cheese sauce works pretty good, whatever works for you. And it works very nicely. Actually, now that I think of it, Charlie said there were different ways a person's aura could be opened up to make themselves vulnerable to the demons who would love to attack our self-esteem and get us to fear ourselves, hate ourselves, whatever. Lose our self-respect. And raping somebody or killing somebody has a way of marking them, creating that wound that follows them from lifetime after lifetime until they heal themselves. But alcohol abuse can do it too. And my parents were alcoholics for 10 years before I was conceived. And because my father bought produce in bulk, we were raw food vegans, and failed to refrigerate. And so every summer we were alcoholics, and in the winter recovered, but not enough because my mother's immune system was so shot she got sick every winter, more sick than the previous one. My brother was a whole head shorter than our cousin, who was 3 weeks different in age from him. A mere 3 weeks, yet was a whole same weight. So my brother looked chubby because of his short stature, and everybody thought he was younger than his years. And he hated that. So he grew up when we separated from my father when he was 10 and I was 3. Or actually I was 2 and he was 9, and then my father died the next year. My brother grew out of that for the most part, and then ended up looking older than his years, very mature looking. And he likes that. He likes looking more mature. Makes him feel good. So this is all very interesting about beeswax. Who would have known? Man. Oh well, got nothing more to say. There is one more thing to be said about paranoia. The consequence of paranoia is resentment. And it's very much an abusive lineage in which the abuser finds a new target, and the target becomes an abuser themselves because, like schizophrenia is avoiding people, right? Afraid of what? Afraid of being tormented by people all over again, because you still have the resentment and thus the fear of it happening again and again and again. So you're constantly in that state of torment because you remember the pain of the persecution and it hasn't left you. So the beeswax clears the resentment from the psyche. It's like a numbing, a psychological numbing to the psyche, so that you no longer resent having been persecuted, so that you don't have to go around being fearful of being persecuted again.
Funny that schizophrenia is nothing more than a nutritional deficiency which yields itself to the ingestion of beeswax in very minute quantity. And we're not talking about a lot here, just a little bit hidden in a cheese sauce, melted cheese, or melted in butter, and then used in a recipe.